time to chat today. We know you have so much on your plate, but we really, really appreciate you taking the time to talk about your experience leading high growth PE-backed companies like Optimizely and now on the board of Meltwater. So let's jump into the conversation if you're okay with that.
Yeah, of course. Great to be here, Haley, and great to spend some time with you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing your answers. So working with you, we've learned you have a really interesting background. You started your career in engineering before transitioning to product leadership. What made you decide to make that shift?
I think this is a fun question for me, and it's sort of like, I grew up in a family of engineers, so it was always assumed that I would get into engineering somehow, and from an education perspective, that makes sense. But when I graduated school, it was a little bit of like, no, I don't want to be the classic computer engineer that's just like sitting in a room and coding out reams and reams of code. Like I like people, I like talking to people. And so I wanted that to be part of what my career is. And I didn't know at the time that there was this role called a product manager or program manager and other roles. And so when the job offer for Microsoft came, it was sort of like so far beyond what my dream job was. I was like, of course I'm going to take this. And it played out really well. The thing that I found over time was I spent a lot of my week doing a lot of like the cross group work, thinking about like, what is the impact? Are we building the right things? And I spent Friday nights and weekends writing code. And I'm like, wait, I'm doing my day job on the weekends. This is crazy. Maybe I should make what I enjoy doing my day job. And I had this person who was the GM of our business at the time, really supportive. And, she asked me at one point, she's like, Rupali, what do you want to do in the next 5 years? And so it was a forcing function for me to step back and think about like what I wanted to do. And I realized that the things that drive me are impact both to the customer and to the business. And I think I would have used different words in the past, like in the early 2000s when I made the transition of like, oh, I like these types of activities versus that. But in hindsight, it's the outcome that matters, not the how I got there. And so code for me was the easiest thing to give up. And so that's how I made the transition. And part of it is, I don't know, the confidence or the audacity to say, I'm going to go do it. If I fail at it, we'll deal with that and see what happens.
It's interesting because it's also the code it's the piece of each, right? And you wanted to see the whole process.
That's what I wanted to see. Like at the end of the day, even today, what gives me excitement is the first demo of a product or a feature and seeing it in the hands of customers. And so like that has been a red thread for the couple of decades I've been in the industry.
Yeah, and watching the evolution of a product.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What surprised you about the role of making that transition?
I think, everyone talks about like there's more EQ, you have to do cross-group collaboration, you're driving by influence, all the standard things come up. I think the thing for me, and it's still visceral to this day, is the what stood out for the transition. And I think this was hard for me, and we don't acknowledge that, as a PM, you have to put pen to paper for the first time. Like you have to consolidate all of the learnings. And so it takes a new level of humility and vulnerability to be the person that's doing that. It is way easier, at least as I was an engineer, to say like, look, someone's put pen to paper, I can critique all the things. Like to redline something, in my opinion, is way easier than the first time writing it. It's not to say that don't redline things, like I'm not married to the words I write. But it takes a level of effort that I wasn't expecting. And I think that surprised me and was harder than I expected.
I can empathize because in marketing often, I worked at agency side for a long time and I would say, this is the first draft. This is what you're supposed to tear apart. I did the hard work by, putting something on the paper, right? And now tear it apart. Let's make it better. And I think
it takes work to get there, right? Like it takes a lot of work. And it's sort of like, yes, I feel you. I had a new respect for marketing as well.
But it's true though. I mean, once there is that first draft and you are working together and you are collaborating with other teams, turns into something better, but you have to develop the skin first. But I imagine you've always had that tough to even make those big transitions. And
it takes work. I think, every transition, I've had a few more of those in my career than most people at this time, but I don't know, the learning always makes it worthwhile.
So much learning. Yeah. Speaking about learning, is you have had the opportunity to work at some crazy hyper growth companies like Box and Tableau and Qualtrics during their big growth years. How did the role of product evolve during those years versus how it's viewed today?
I think there's two questions in there, and I'll unconflate them and sort of like talk about them both separately and overlap a little bit. Is how has the role of product management evolved, and what does that translate to in hyper growth, which I think has a whole different meaning in of itself, having gone through the phases. I think, in the early days, it used to be a glorified project manager or a program manager, and you were sort of like tied together some of the dots. But I think Google and Yahoo did a really good job of defining the role of a product manager as one that's driving outcomes for the business and wears the customer hat. Like, it's very simplest, and at the very core, that is what a product manager does. And that hasn't changed actually over the couple of decades of like that genesis of what they do. Now, how they do it, what are the workarounds that can design do the job, et cetera, et cetera. Like, absolutely, there's different roles, and there's a lot of flexibility in who can do the role, right? Because it needs a level of skill to be able to do it. And a lot of disciplines bring that. So to me, it's always like the lines between product and design, or between product and marketing, or between product and engineering are squishy and different in different organizations. And I actually really respect that. And so sort of like if someone, for example, I think it's Airbnb that's like, yeah, we're going to get rid of all product managers and we're just going to go to design led. I'm like, all power to you. The function and the title can change, but as long as the work of like we're thinking about the customer and we're driving impact for the business, those two things come together, I don't really care who does my job, right? Like, I'm not the person that's possessive about my title or job. So part of it comes from there. So that's a little bit of the evolution. And I think the boundaries have gotten squishier over time rather than less, honestly. And I think that's a very, very good thing. The hyper growth piece is really interesting. There's a few things when I think about hyper growth that are super, super critical in the role of a product manager and even within the company overall, right? The strategy is critical. You have to know what the North Star is when you're moving that fast, because otherwise some people are moving north, some are moving east, and guess what happens then? You end up at different destinations, which is not what you need in hypergrowth. There's no substitute for understanding the customer. Again, I talked about that as the genesis and like the seed of what the product manager does. You just have to do it so much more in hypergrowth, because some of it is you're expanding the business over time. Your customer base might be changing. You're bringing in new ICPs to the mix. And last, I'd say the ability to be agile. Shit's going to break. And it's going to break not because it was designed badly, it's because it was designed just right. And it's supposed to break. And so, I'll use Qualtrics as an example. We were lucky if our processes lasted 12 months. And sometimes you're like, wow, someone did a really bad job of defining the process. You're like, no, well, if they defined something that lasted 2 years, there would be way too much red tape.
Right.
And so it was designed to be bigger than we needed in the moment, but smaller than we needed, a year from then. So you're sort of like in this continuous motion of re-evolving, and you have to be okay with that. You can't blame people for the past, because the decisions were made with the best knowledge of what you have. And we were growing, in the triple digits, and you're sort of like, yeah, stuff's going to break. And you just have to embrace the fact that that's a good thing. Like, there are good problems and there's bad problems. I'll take the ones that come with crazy growth. Don't get me wrong. And don't get me wrong, it's wild in the moment. It is wild and it takes a lot of effort. But when you look in hindsight, you're like, yes, those are the problems I want to solve. And so it's a little bit of an attitude and an amplified version of product that comes into play in hypergrowth.
Well, it's interesting because I think I want to unpack that a little bit, because there's actually so many interesting things there. I mean, number one is everybody running to the North Star, everybody focused on the same thing. And then that idea of being okay with things breaking. A lot of those things come down to having the right leader who's bringing everybody along to the right place, and also making sure that they're okay with failure, right? So that you can keep moving. Good. There's nothing worse than being caught in failure and everybody pointing and you're not moving. So I want to talk about that a little bit. And working in executive recruitment, we speak to a lot of hiring managers, and they talk about the struggle of a lot of product leaders to be cross-functional, to collaborate, to bring that vision. But you, coming from a technical background and having worked in different places, I'm wondering how you sort of bridge those gaps and overcome that, because clearly you are doing an amazing job.
I think amazing depends on the day and depends on who's looking at it. In the moment, I never feel like I'm doing an amazing job. Right. It's always like, I don't know. I've made peace with the fact that I'm going to be doing a shitty job most of the time. And it's sort of like, it happens to drive me back. Great, I'll take the wins. And so
it's okay with being okay with not getting it right every time, right? That's an important part of evolving a product, right? Yeah. Or building a business or growing a business.
I think, when I think about like sort of like my journey into this and sort of like what matters at the end of the day, like every product leader comes with different capabilities, right? And sort of like, if I think about like leading through change, driving to clarity is so, so important at the end of the day. And as I think about hiring, there's a couple of things. One is I have to lay the foundation for safety in the team. And the other piece is like the direction has to be clear, yet we have to be open to change, right? So it's sort of like those things are in of themselves in conflict with each other. And yes, like you have to work cross-functionally, you have to lead by influence, all of those things happen as a PM, and learning to lead by influence is a real skill. I underestimated that in the early years because as a product leader, to your point of like, yes, I may have come from a tech background, but at the end of the day, like you don't own most of the organization that you need to move, right? Like for a successful business outcome, guess what needs to happen? We have to sell the product. Customers have to adopt the product. Someone's got to build the product. Guess how many of those functions we actually manage directly? Zero. And so what are we trying to do? We're trying to create the environment in which our teams are doing the best work to build a product that our sales teams want to sell. So we're exciting engineers on one hand, we're exciting sales on the other hand, right? And I'm simplifying wildly, but you get the point. It's sort of like, that's what needs to happen. And so when I think about like the challenges, like we really have to understand the business well, the customer well, to be able to drive to the outcome, because otherwise it's so easy to go off track. And then you have standard challenges of team. How do you keep them motivated? How to collaborate? How to delegate? Like, I don't know. They're all important, but I bucket them into the, yes, those need to happen.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a lot to keep it all together and keep everybody moving in that same direction, right?
I think sometimes you have to be okay with dropping some balls, right? Like at the end of the day, it's sort of like, as long as the most important things get the most important focus, if you're doing that, then some things will drop, and some things you're okay just silently dropping, and some things you want to be explicit of like, no, I'm not doing this, someone else should do it. Right. And so as long as if you start to get a radar around those things, like that, I think is a skill worth developing.
Yeah, for sure. And also, I imagine building the right team to support you so that you have people that you trust, that you're not constantly micromanaging. And
no. And I think, for me, a lot of it comes down to like, if I think about the teams, it's sort of like the teams have to be independent, right? Like what matters to me is you have your own point of view. You can lead independently. Whether I exist or not should get you still to 80% of what you would be doing. Like I can help amplify, but in isolation, you should still be able to lead. And that's what matters. Like when I'm hiring, that's what I'm looking for is like, can you independently drive the business? The other question I ask myself is like, would I be comfortable working for you? I want people smarter than me. And then it's the other way I think about it is like, what do you spike on? Like, I'd rather not have a team of averages. I'd rather have a team of spiky people where they do really well in one or two things. And I'm okay with the weaknesses they have because someone else on my team spikes on that spectrum, right? So it's sort of like, the highs are the ones that make up the great team versus everyone checks the box on these things universally. And so, yeah, in some of my hiring loops, I do get split loops where some people really like a candidate and some people don't for different reasons. Right. So I'm not always looking for the all yeses.
Yeah. I love that hiring barometer though, of would I want to work for this person that's going to work for me? I think that's such a smart way of thinking about who's the right person, right? Because that's who we want on our teams, right? The strongest, most capable, incredible people that are going to make us better the way.
Yeah, I think that's the non-selfish way of looking at it. The selfish way version of it is everything my team does reflects on me anyway, so I might as well hire people that are better than me. Like life is good.
That's true too.
But no, I joke a little bit, but you're right. It's the people make us better, and the better they are, the better they push me to be, right? So at the end of the day, I'm learning. And definitely I have people that are stronger than me on my team in various areas. And the fact that they choose to work for me is humiliating and humbling at times and feels empowering as well. So it's sort of like, yeah.
Well, it's true team. I mean, you're not going to get anywhere without a true team.
No.
Let's talk about PE-backed SaaS and working in PE and the different types of expectations versus working in other companies, right? The numbers are always important, but the growth and the margins are so important when in PE-backed. And as a product leader, you're looking to drive both the growth and retention. Where do you see companies missing the mark, or where are you seeing some of the challenges?
I think Where companies miss the mark often is when they don't recognize that they need to focus on one or the other more than the other. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Like in today's environment, it's almost universally true that everyone needs to focus on retention. Like there are some companies that probably need to focus more on new because they have a great funnel.
Right.
Like across the board, just given all of the macroeconomics, it's much easier to say like retention is a thing that we all need to drive.
Apparently it's easier.
Can't go too far wrong on that right now.
Yeah.
But I think when you're in different phases, not recognizing that you're going from one phase to another is where I actually see companies go wrong. Or the other, and I'll unpack both of these, like, so not recognizing the phase or focusing too much on just growth, because that's the type of leadership we have. And sort of like growth is exciting. New bookings are exciting. It drives a level of adrenaline that retention doesn't get you to, right? So it's sort of like, I'll call that the shiny object syndrome a little bit. And so those are the two challenges that I see, and there's several around it. But like let's start with the first one, the going through different phases, right? So if your retention numbers are great and you're feeling really good about retention. So I was at a company at one point where our GDR was 95 plus and NDR was incredible. Mm-hmm. I was willing at that point in time to trade off a couple of points for new logos. And it's sort of like, if we hadn't thought about that consciously, we would not have made an investment in a new business area, but would have continued to just, and I say just, I should take the just out, like we would have continued to evolve our existing products, right? So it's sort of like, you have to think about that balance of like, what are the seeds you're sowing for the next 2 years, 3 years, especially in product. You want to take a longer term view because the bets you make today may not mature all in the same time. And so that's a challenge. And sort of like, if you're not clear about next year, if it's retention focused, and remember, we're sitting in March and I want to think about next year, am I going to be retention focused or growth focused? Like those are decisions you're making now. And so you want to do that consciously.
Yeah. Do you think that the org chart matters? So if your CRO oversees customer success, they're more aligned to that versus if another person is, if success is separate? I mean, a good leadership team should all be aligned to the same metrics, but
I think the org chart matters less than the CEO's center of gravity and the gravitas of the characters in those roles. Right. Like regardless of whether CS reports into a CRO or whether they report directly into the CEO, I've seen things go awry on both sides. Like I don't think the org chart matters as much. It's the how much weight do we, and typically the one that we don't get enough weight to, and I may be generalizing, is retention, right? So it's like really that's my point about the shiny object is like, if you're motivated by new deals, like it's hard on retention because it's sort of like retention is an all company problem. It never is just a CS problem. And so to give it time of day, to give it the ops focus that it needs, like for all of us to spend time on it, like we can't always be chasing the new deals. And that's where I've seen it fail more than the org charts. But that's again, sample size of one from what I've seen.
Well, and it can be difficult in that PE-backed environment where growth overwhelmingly becomes the goal, right? In many cases.
I think it's more balanced, honestly. In PE, VC is sort of like actually harder because VC is a little bit more of a hits business where you're trying to, 10x, 100x the outcomes, because at the end of the day, you're playing across a portfolio. In PE, it's a little bit more balanced because every company you're shooting for, and I'm generalizing again, 3x or 5x the outcome. And so I find it's the opposite actually of what you've seen, Helly, is that in VC, it's like growth above all else. And to drive growth, you need retention, but it's sort of like you need that number to be massive.
Right. The playbook's a little more balanced, I guess.
Yeah.
I want to switch gears a little bit because you're an advisor on the Meltwater board. And I want to know how that experience is shaping your leadership. How do you see the role of operational advisor making the biggest impact? And are you bringing your learnings into your executive role and how that's influencing what you're doing?
I'll start with the second question a little bit, right? Like it's the opportunity to see your role from outside in is incredibly unique. And to your point about like, how do I bring, like those are the learnings that I'm getting, which is amazing and far beyond expectations. In terms of like the main thrust of the question of like, how do operational advisors come into play? Some of the things that I'm finding, both in terms of like me being an advisor to Meltwater, as well as on our board, what I see from the operational advisor and the independent advisor that we have is it's a little bit of we've seen it before. There's a lot of like, we've been here, we've done that. And so there's a lot of real learnings that come from having been in the role and looking not just at here's the financial picture or the outcome, but like these are the real challenges in achieving that, right? So you can get in, there's the why and the how, of course, but then you can get in deeper into the how you get there. And so some of the things there, again, I've talked a little bit about leading through influence. At the end of the day, we as leaders are operating through our people. The organization and people matter. And so when I think about the role as an operational advisor, part of it is like, great, this is the goal you want to get to. How are you going to do it? Do you have the right set of people in the right seats? What are the ideas that I can bring to bear to help you think through slightly differently, right? There's a second aspect of it, which we can help you see around corners. It's sort of like when you're day to day in the business, it's easier for someone on the outside to see like what might be waiting for you around the corner. And it's funny, you might say like, don't you do that for your own job? Yes, I do, but my advisor still pulls me along to the thing that I didn't think about. And it's sort of like, yes, in one role, I'm an operator, in another role, I'm an advisor. And sort of like, it's easier to see things outside in when you're not in it day to day.
Yeah.
And I think the last one is access to network and expertise, but that's a given.
Yeah. But I imagine growing that network too can be really powerful.
Yeah.
There's that old leadership cliche about getting out on the balcony where you can, you have that full view. And I mean, it is interesting. And I think that is so powerful that advisors bring to the boards because you understand it so deeply, but you're bringing a brand new set of eyes.
Yeah. And it's hard, right? Because there's some things you sort of like the team has to execute on it. You're just an advisor to a certain extent. Like you can suggest, and so it's sort of like you can't take the reins too. Right. And so it's a real balance. And at the end of the day, like we have to be conscious of like we're an advisor. The team is doing what they are doing within what they know, right? Like, and so there's a calibration that needs to happen of like, no, just because I've done something before doesn't mean it's going to translate in that organization in the exact way that it worked for me. I can bring the ideas to the table, but at the end of the day, every situation is different. Right. And that's a realization and recognition that we need to always maintain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's good. So it is a balance, but it's the important balance, I think, right? You're there to learn from each other. And
yeah.
It's actually fun. Has anything surprised you about the role as a board advisor?
I think what has surprised me, this is the first time that I'm on the board, so I don't know that I went in with a ton of expectations. I think what surprised me is what we talked about a little bit earlier is everyone's trying to do the best they can within the constraints that they have. And it's sort of like every company has not that dissimilar set of challenges. And so I think that surprised me is oh, yeah, been there, seen that, not that different from some of the things we're looking at either, right? So I think the transferability of the types of things that companies have challenges with surprised me actually to the magnitude. Like I was expecting some of it to be similar, but like the level of similarities higher than I expected, honestly.
Right. Interesting. But I mean, I guess that is that perfect opportunity to be able to support and learn from each other because you are going and have been through the same challenges.
And it also helps me feel like I'm having an impact, right? Because it's like, okay, these are the things we're going through. AI is a great one, right? Because I think we're all going through it together. So if someone's like, oh, I've seen what 3 years from today looks like, it's like, no, you haven't because it hasn't happened yet. Mm-hmm. And so I think some of that is more balanced, but it's sort of like, great, what are we thinking about? What is my network thinking about? Those are the things that I can bring to bear for the Meltwater team.
Yeah. And to your point, bringing in perspective, bringing in, other thoughts or challenges that you don't necessarily think of when you're sitting in it. But when you can see from above, you can pinpoint some of those things that maybe don't look aligned or.
Yeah, you can see the patterns, right? To your point about the balcony is you're looking at the whole scene and you can see the business, you can see how everything's operating and you can see the forest from the trees.
Right.
It's truly that way.
And the interesting perspective of working directly with the PE.
Yeah.
As well, right?
Yeah.
So I know we've taken up a ton of your time already, but I want one more piece of advice, I guess, looking back on all of the leadership lessons that you've had in your career. Do you have, one piece of advice that you give to your team or mentors about what you've learned along the way?
I think the biggest one for me, I'll give you three leadership lessons actually.
Yes.
The first one is prioritization. Like, focus on what matters because otherwise, nothing's super important and we sort of dilute the impact that we can have. The second one is build leaders. It's really, really important to build leaders. I don't believe in the world where, just firefighting and being reactive drives to glory. And like, yeah, some organizations reward that. But to me, it's about if you build leaders, you're building sustainable businesses, and that's what matters at the end of the day. And the last one I'll share is truth matters. Like, create a culture where people can tell you the truth. We've all heard the adage of, hey, the status only gets greener as you get up the chain, or, news only gets more positive as it goes up the chain, whatever version you've heard. And so create a culture where that's not happening, where people tell you the truth, because that's when we can move fast. I think if I had to pick one of these, I'd say build leaders is my biggest one. Like, we spend too much time rewarding the hero and not enough time thinking about, like, are we building sustainable businesses? Are we building structures in which people can operate effectively? And I don't mean that that means that the leader itself isn't important. The person is hugely important. But if you're not building the frame, then you aren't growing the company as fast as it can grow. I've seen that.
Right. Well, it sounds like your team is very lucky to have you as their leader because you're clearly implementing some great things to both get the company where it needs to be going, but also build people up with you.
Trying to, and I'm fortunate to have them. So it goes both ways.
Yeah. Well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to connect. I really, truly appreciate it. Yeah, and it's been wonderful.
It's been wonderful. Thank you for making me think about my career and ask me all these fun questions.